Well, Jay, thanks so much for joining on the podcast. It was really great talking to you today.
Likewise. And it's been a Helvetica of a good time.
Oh, my God. Cut.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Bill, and I'm here with my good friend, Carl. Hey, Carl, how's it going?
Not too bad. I have some sort of head cold situation going on this week, so I'm worried I sound frog-like, but you told me not so bad. So
I think you sound great.
That's good. One of the benefits to never sounding great is that it's hard to sound worse. So
that's right.
Gonna roll with that.
I feel the same way. Having a just perpetual deviated septum sounding voice is that's the one benefit of it.
Under promise, over deliver, baby, all the way.
That's right. You know, I forget often that people listen to this. I think it's just us talking to ourselves, but people do listen. And in fact,
people listen.
We had a week this week, Carl. You won't do it, but I need to call it out that we've had our best month ever on the podcast. We had our best individual day of downloads, and I think that was on a day we hadn't even promoted the new episode yet. People were coming to it. So it's been really exciting around here. People are finding value in this. So to all the listeners, thank you so much for coming back, sharing it.
Yeah.
Continuing to be with us.
Endless gratitude to everyone who puts up with these barely professional opening intros and sticks around for the actual conversation. We can only get better.
I choose to believe that people come back for these introductions. So anyway,
I'm convinced all these downloads and streams are just my mom.
You know what?
Repeatedly.
However, you got to get the numbers, Carl. However, you got to get them.
Thanks, Mom.
So this week, we got to up the game now. This is how it goes. We set the precedent and people are coming, they're listening. And so we've got to continue to deliver in the quality of our guests. And that is something we're going to do this week. Do you want to tell everyone about this week's guest, Carl, because you happen to be the host?
Yes, I am the host, and this week's guest is a very good friend of mine. His name is Jason Debiak. He is the founder and partner and creative mind behind an agency out of northern New Jersey called Paper Tiger. Jay and I go back decades. We actually met in kindergarten. Oakland Public Schools represent. So I've known him for about 34 years, which is shocking that I've known anyone that long that I'm not related to. I've actually wanted to have Jay on the show since its inception, but I was like, is it just going to turn into high school stories? So I kind of held off. But the truth is, he's a brilliant designer and a brilliant design thinker. And that really comes out in this conversation. He and his brother founded their agency in 2008 after working in the local indie punk music scene for a while, doing graphic design and art direction and whatnot. And they've built it, as they call it, as a family-run business that reflects who they are as people and their principles and family and quality and all of that. I hope it's empowering for people who have dreamt of starting their own business or going to work for themselves, because, well, I wouldn't say he offers you a roadmap. I think you listen to him and you're like, it's doable. It's a mix of hustle and confidence and humility and focus. There's a lot that people can take away from his and his brother's experience, starting this agency from scratch and, apply to their own vision and their own dreams.
I know that there's a lot of takeaways for this episode, but the one that strikes me most immediately is that all roads lead back to the indie punk rock scene for you, Carl, don't they?
It seems that way. But actually, what is interesting about this conversation with Jay is, so we talk about, starting the agency and what that's like and how he sort of navigated that. But we also talk about this idea of obsolescence and specifically with regard to technology, because he's one of these people who kind of leans into it. It's like, okay, fine, there's a new technology that might put us out of business. Well, let's lean into it. Maybe there's an opportunity there. And he's doing that right now with a lot of AI design tools, which are exploding everywhere. I think you can look at that and say like, wow, that's going to take people's jobs away. And he's like, well, what if it actually frees up designers to do more work? And it's interesting to hear him talk about it as a small design agency owner, where these kind of tools could either be a threat or an opportunity. And I encourage people to tune into that part of the conversation.
Awesome. Well, with no further ado, I will turn it back over to you, Carl, and to this week's creative character, Jay, for another wonderful episode. Please enjoy, everybody.
Welcome to this week's episode of Creative Characters. I am your host, Carl, and I'm here with a very good friend of mine, a very longtime friend of mine, Jay Debiak. Jay, how are you today?
I am good. This is exciting. I don't podcast much, so I'm really eager to hear the sound of my voice back to me and hate it. But it's great. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Ridgewood, New Jersey.
I podcast more than I probably should, and certainly more than I ever thought I would. So welcome to the world of listening to yourself talk. We should get this out of the way up front. I've known you for a very long time. We met in kindergarten 34 years ago, which I was thinking about that leading up to this recording. And I was like, how have I known anyone that long that I'm not related to?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think I even remember seeing you in kindergarten. I first walked in and I was like, I'm going to podcast with that guy one day.
Someday. I don't know what a podcast is, but the word
it was there
flashing in my mind.
Yeah. Long time, man. I can't believe it. I was like, maybe 20 years now.
It has. Well, and you are here not just because you are a good friend of mine, but because you and your brother have a really successful design agency in northern New Jersey. But I was going to say, part of the reason I invited you on is, it actually has been pretty cool to watch you and your brother build this thing over time. And I can remember, when we first met all those years ago, you've always had a very natural talent for art, for drawing, whatever. You can kind of tell who's going to be good at it at a young age, because not only is, the work good, but the actual composition and the approach to work is just a little bit more elevated, where, maybe everyone has their son up in the corner and you're like, maybe mine shouldn't be up in the corner. And you were always that kid.
That's awesome. Thank you for noticing.
And so it's not surprising to me that, you've gone on as an adult to be a successful designer and to have a successful agency of your own. And I was wondering if there was a point in your life, adolescence or whatever, where you identified that as something you wanted to do, or do you think when you look back that the point you're at in your life now feels like if it was always meant to be, or it was inevitable, or has it sort of surprised you that you've ended up where you are?
Yeah, there are bits and pieces of it that feel natural. Being able to work for myself is something I've always wanted to do. I couldn't imagine myself having a boss. I think the last time I did that, I was delivering pizzas in high school. So, which actually was pretty cool. I would go back to that one day.
Yeah.
When I was really young, I'm a younger brother of two older brothers, and I just wanted to do what they did. So for a period of time there, you just want to be one of your cool older brothers. But then that eventually morphed into me realizing what I'm good at and what I like to do. And the fact that I was able to craft something around that is pretty great. And I knew I always wanted to do something in the creative field, just didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what the options were when you're young. And I find that most of the people that I know within the field that have been successful have organically gotten to where they are and learned as they went. And it was just it's all about the journey. So I'm glad I'm here.
Well, and why don't you tell us a bit about your agency, because I've neglected to introduce it properly. But yeah, tell us a bit about your agency and what your specialty is, what kind of clients you work with. And in no particular order, maybe we can talk a bit about working with your brother and what that's like and what kind of dynamic that is.
Yeah. So our agency is called Paper Tiger. I started the agency with my brother, Mark, back in 2008. So we've always worked together in some capacity. And a lot of people are always like, how do you work with your brother? I would totally murder my brother. And for us, it's totally natural. We balance each other really, really well. And so that to me is very natural. So we used to work a long time in the music business. He ran a record label and I was kind of there just trying to be cool and helping out. Then people stopped buying music in 2008, 2007. Napster came along. We were just like, oh no. We tried our best to stay in it and be scrappy, but really our heart wasn't in it anymore. And we got together and we decided we would go back to what we both love. He went to film school. I never went to art school. I guess I went to kind of like a punk rock college with a band touring around or whatever. But we decided to do what we love, which is art and design, trying to bring something beautiful to the world because everything around us is just pretty messy. And we've been doing that ever since. I guess it's 14 years now. Right now, we do mainly interactive design, websites, and branding. Most of that is in a B2B field. So a lot of tech companies and startups and some big old companies, but mainly mid-sized businesses and all that kind of good stuff.
Let's talk a bit about the music portion of your story, because you come from a music family, like your older brother was in several bands and has worked in music for most of his life. And as you said, you and your brother Mark worked at a record label, and you were in a touring band for a little while, which was really wild, like seeing you in a show.
Yeah, I would take my glasses off. I couldn't see anything. Yeah. So I was in another world.
But I mean, in particular, all of this was in more of like the indie punks, like slightly underground DIY scene. And I'm curious how that experience has shaped the way you run your business today, if it has at all.
Yeah, a lot of people get out of high school and they go right to college, and they use that as an opportunity to individuate, to be on their own and to find themselves and all that kind of stuff. I did not. So instead, I decided to go along on a journey with my brother and tour the country and play music and just see a little bit of everything. You'll learn so much meeting people all over the country and exploring all new places. But at the same time, you're also pretty broke the whole time. You're like, I got $12 to my name today, and that's all I have. And even working in the music business on the marketing side and on an indie record label, you don't have much. You have to do everything yourself. So when we did start this business, we kept that mindset. I like to think that we're scrappy. We still kind of are. I don't like to say it. It's not very professional sounding, but we're scrappy. And we were able to accomplish a lot for our clients with very little. And both of us really enjoy that process of creative process and the puzzle solving process of design. And with that in mind, I think in our original clients, it was almost like working with a band. Every band has a brand. They have a thing that they do, and that they have to be marketed and they have to be understood, and you have to really understand what they are and what they represent. And bringing that to just a company was a natural transition for us. And the companies really appreciated that we came from a background that was creative and exciting and all that kind of stuff. And they thought we were cool or something.
Yeah. Well, and scrappy, it's an interesting word because I feel like it's not uncommon for people getting started in something to describe themselves that way, or at least it's true. And it's whether you're in a band or you're starting a business of your own, a design agency, whatever the case may be. Scrappy, I think, is symptomatic of circumstances, right? Scrappiness is born out of necessity, where it's like you have to make do with little or with limited resources. So you scrap it together and you figure it out. And I think as you evolve out of that stage, I wonder if that morphs into something that's more of a practice. So whether you would call it resourcefulness or just creative, from a problem solving standpoint, I don't think scrappy is necessarily a pejorative or a negative term, but I do think you evolve. You take the lessons that you learn in your scrappy era and you carry them forward into something more deliberate, would you say?
Absolutely. I think by doing that, there's like a lot of kind of instant gratification that happens. You get something done your way very fast and very efficiently. Well, I don't know if it was that efficient, but very quickly. And so that's something we've grown accustomed to and have grown as part of our business, where we are all about efficiencies, getting things done and always refining things to be still high quality, but needing to do it in the least amount of time possible, because I don't think our attention spans can handle anything more than that. So a lot of it comes down to process. I think over the years became really obsessed with process and how we run the agency and how our design team runs, because this way we're able to generate great design for our clients in this kind of quick, simple way that is fast and efficient. So I think there's a piece of it there that is connected, and it also helps us stay smaller. To me, I love wearing a lot of hats, and I expect that our team is okay doing that as well. No one comes in here and says, hey, I'm only do development for this type of technology, and that is it. And I'm like, no, we all kind of all hands on deck and we get it done. I still empty the garbages here. I don't care. So there's an element of that as well. So we stay small on purpose, and yeah.
So I'm curious, as someone who's known you for a while, I do think it is easy to sit here and in hindsight say, well, of course you would go into design and of course you would be successful at it because it just seems obvious looking back. But, I am wondering now if there was a point when you were younger, middle school, high school age, where you did start to really envision yourself working in a creative capacity as an adult? And I asked a previous guest the same question, like, when did the hobby or when did the interest start to turn into something more for you? Like, was there an inflection point, or was it just sort of this gradual flow, or was there a point where you're just like, I want to do this and this is why?
It was always a solitary thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once people started asking me for things is when I realized I was able to start creating for other people, basically them giving me prompts. I always enjoyed still life drawing or something where I can kind of just take what's in front of me and do it and pick it apart. The creative piece is definitely there, but I like a lot of that, the technical aspect of design. And so I would always be like, I remember when I was a little kid, I'd be at like the diner, like coloring on the back of the placemat. And I'd always be like, Mom, what should I draw? She was like, I don't know, fucking draw whatever, And I'm like, no, I need to know, And so once people started asking me for things, I had a really bad punk band in our high school, needed a t-shirt design, and somebody else needed an album cover, and they were terrible things that I created, but it got me working, understanding the applications and learning new things. I had never used Photoshop before. I'd only done work with my hands, so it really got me interested in these applications that I had never used before. And then I really went down those rabbit holes and started exploring how to use them and how to really push myself creatively using them. And then over time, it just kept going. After that, I just was doing record covers for a couple of years after high school. That was the only way I was making money at the time. But, I was doing all these like really grungy, dark metal records, which is not my thing, but for some reason it was coming my way. And, you really learn a lot about the design process and the printing process and dealing with all sorts of personality types. And it just became natural for me. It was just a natural connection for me to just go in that direction because people liked the work I did. I enjoyed doing it. And then I would see it printed or poster for it somewhere. And there's always that validation that comes along with it. But it's just a thing I do on my own.
So that's interesting that you mentioned the prompts, because we were having lunch before we sat down to do this. And we were just sort of talking about how design is both the creation, but also the creative problem solving. And so when you say that things started clicking for you, when people started asking for things, and giving you prompts as opposed to just make whatever up, that seems to be what turned things a little bit. So I don't know if I really have a question there, but I wonder if that just speaks to that act of using creativity and creative talent to solve a problem or to in response to something, if that's kind of what gives people like you a nudge toward graphic design, toward the role you find yourself in now, working with companies to solve big problems with design as opposed to painting, as opposed to art school.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a piece of it there that I never put together until way later once I started leading other designers. For me, I always had my own internal process, and it was this intense, I would just stare at the screen for 12 hours straight and I'd crawl away exhausted and I'd have a design. I never quite knew why I would be inspired or why it was something that I was able to do. But once I started leading other designers and realizing that by providing them guardrails, they're given more creative freedom. They're able to do what they do in a way that is more impactful, knowing what limitations or what the constraints are. So if you just say, hey, I need you to design something, there's a lot there that could happen that is just all over the place. So when clients give us a prompt, I need this interactive website or something like that. It always helps when they have information. The more information they have for us, the better. And then working within that and really tapping deeper and deeper and deeper into their needs and deeper into their desires or their goals, we can think more about those.
Well, I know exactly what you mean, though, because my background is in writing. And I think like a lot of 17-year-olds, like I went off to college with dreams of novels and fiction writing stardom in my head. And what I found is that I wasn't suited for it because I would sit down and just couldn't pick a place to start. And I think once I sort of found work that was, in more initially editorial and then other forms of writing and whatnot, having that challenge put in front of you of like, hey, figure this out. And you're like, okay, that I can work with. Imagining a world that doesn't exist is a skill set that just not everyone has. But when someone says like, hey, we need to do X, Y, Z, and we don't know how, well, that's a puzzle. And that's a different mentality, right? It's like, I'm going to crack that puzzle and I'm going to do it with this skill set.
Yeah. Having, like I was saying before, kind of guardrails for the designers and then also challenging them. The balance between those two things is really important because otherwise everything starts to look the same. So you giving them tasks that are basically the same. We're using similar structures in how we build, or we're using the same application, or a lot of the things we're building or designing is for our developers, and they have their own system in place for building and efficiencies. So we need to give them things at a certain size and a certain dimension and certain file sizes and those kinds of things. So we still have all of these limitations. So how do you challenge yourself to create something totally different and unique within that, which is for some reason always really exciting. And I think a lot of designers, graphic designers, flourish in that type of environment. At least what I've seen. I grew up, I have my older brother, not the one I run the business with, but my older brother is a songwriter and he's an artist. And to me, that's always been different. He has to create. He has to sit down and get something that's in his head that is just magically there. And I have no idea how he does it. And he has to get it out. And that's why I probably never saw myself as an artist, because that was never there. It was always prompt related. And so to me, I was like, all right, I love doing this. I think I have the skill set to do it, but I'm not in that place where I'm just like waking up in the middle of the night and designing a website because I had a dream about it. Unlike, a lot of creative people I've met in the music industry.
Yeah. Okay, let's fast forward a bit back to around 2008. So the romanticism of traveling the world in a touring van is worn off a bit, suffice to say.
A tree literally fell on our van and crushed it, and that's how things ended.
So a tree literally crushed your dreams of a music career.
It did me a favor, for sure.
Yeah, sometimes the universe is not subtle. So you and your brothers say, like, I've got a better idea. Let's start a design agency from scratch. How do you arrive at that point, and how do you convince yourself it's going to work?
I think our first initial concept is like, you look around and like a lot of things are just gross, like poorly designed, or you want to just like fix everything around you. And I remember like looking around and being like, even if we just were able to skim a little bit off the top, we would be happy, and that's just a tiny bit off the top of everything that's ugly, or into somebody that needs help, or somebody that's trying to build their business, and have that, we could make a comfortable lives for ourselves. And we only really saw us as a 2-person operation, maybe 3 one day or something like that. So I remember having that thought process and being like, okay, it's limitless. Neither one of us had worked for an agency though, or worked with an agency though. So we were winging it. I still feel like I'm doing that, but I guess not. But yeah, neither one of us had that experience. So we were just like the music business. We would sit outside at shows and hand out flyers. We made business cards and we made little promos and we would hand them out. We would go to businesses and stand on corners and give people, our stuff away. We'd hit up Craigslist ads and that kind of stuff, and just dug in immediately and just started seeing what we can generate, because we needed a portfolio. So we were designing some really, really weird stuff in the beginning. I don't even want to get into it, but nothing dark. It was just like, I never thought of myself as creating these things. I think at one point we were like the #1 salon design business agency in the area. We were doing a lot of work with Jewish organizations in the area too, like schools and those kinds of things. And you learn a lot because everyone has different needs and has different personality types. And you start learning a little bit of everything very fast. And I think you were able to do that quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the scrappiness coming into play, isn't it? It's, you go use whatever means are available to you and get the work, and you start building up not just the portfolio, but the experience, right?
Yeah. It's just a journey of screwing up and then learning from that. That's all it's really been, especially you don't have the existing experience. It's just like, all right, let's go screw a bunch of things up. And we're okay with that because our egos aren't really going to get in the way.
Well, and you said something interesting where you basically said, like, if we peel off the top of all this grossness out there, we can probably make a comfortable living, which to me sounds like a pretty modest ambition. But I think that speaks to the importance of really having a clear idea of what success looks like going into something. If you go in with saying, like, we're really doing this because we love it or because we have a passion for it, and we're not necessarily doing it to achieve a certain level of wealth, fame, notoriety, whatever the case may be. I wonder if that helps keep the focus on the work and your own mental health in that process, and almost can liberate you to then find success organically just through the quality of your work and sort of your own diligence at it.
Absolutely. We always took a super laid back approach to work. We still do. The agency's obviously much larger. We still take that laid back approach of you work from wherever you want to work from. You put the time in whenever you feel inspired. You take the time off that you need. We usually do we have an unlimited PTO policy here. So just go, leave, get out of here. I don't care. So that laid back approach was definitely something that came with us, where we needed to be in an environment where we could comfortably do that, where we could live the life that we wanted to live, but then also be able to generate great work for our clients. And I feel like those two things go hand in hand. You have to be rested. You have to be sleeping. You have to be doing things that you love in order to be inspired for other people, because you're holding a lot for them. You're creating a lot of space for your clients, and that requires a lot of mental health work. I think in the beginning too, we were also just really poor. It was so poor. I think my brother, he fired me from the record label so I could collect unemployment. It was really nice of him. And we were just in my mom's basement with unemployment checks. And so I think anything at that point was sounded way better than what I think our first check, we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do with this? How many Lambos are we going to buy? But it was like $600 or something.
Yeah, it does. It's funny. It does sound like your typical band story where you just kind of scrape along until the radio play picks up and you're like, okay, we can afford on-brand food this month.
Yeah.
Of course, now the reality is, 14 years later, you guys are doing pretty great. I can vouch personally that your office, which I'm sitting in, is quite nice, quite stylish. And so as the business has grown, as you've become more successful, how do you kind of keep yourself centered, I guess? And how do you keep yourself, when I was looking at your website before a couple of days ago, and I noticed on the bottom, you have something to the effect of a family-run design agency.
Family owned and operated.
Family owned and operated. I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that on like a design agency website. And I just feel like that's very integral to what you guys do here. So without an agency background, without even like a business background, how have you guys sort of kept yourselves honest, even as the customers have gotten bigger and the portfolio has grown and the team has gotten bigger? How do you kind of stay centered?
I think we use humor a lot. It's a big piece of our day. I run the agency with my brother, and we're just constantly making fun of each other. There's always something there to kind of just keep you in check and somebody to keep you grounded where you're at. If I tend to stray off, he can help pull me in, and vice versa. So there is that. And, I also had to marry a mental health professional. She definitely helped me as well. But I think being able to work in the office together and be able to constantly collaborate with other really creative people just naturally grounds me. And our goal isn't to take over the world, and it's not to get rich, and it's not to have somebody buy our company. And having money is definitely nice. Being able to provide for your family is nice. And once that consistent paycheck finally kicked in is when we were able to really focus on growing the agency and scaling it, but still keeping our things in line with like what we feel was integral to the future of our business and what we represented. And we still struggle with that though. We still try to come back to, all right, what are we doing here? Who are we? We'll articulate that. We'll do like a whole brand articulation deck, and we'll spend all this time doing it. A couple of years, it changes. Then the clients change and the services change, and there are things that we used to do that are totally obsolete now. But I think the core of what we provide stays the same. We're creative people, and we'll figure it out. And that's, lead with talent, and we deliver quality, and we challenge each other. We conserve resources. So resources, whether internally or even with the client, keep things nimble. So this way, we're always able to jump on something that we find to be really exciting. And as long as we're doing that, it's fulfilling and it's centering. Turning that off when I get home, on the other hand, is a whole other podcast. But it's just bringing good energy to the day-to-day and laughing with your employees and keeping things lighthearted and standing up for them. Is it just ingrained in us? I'm hoping that it's helping other people as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, your 12-hour design days and how absorbed in those kind of projects and design projects you used to get. But nowadays, you're not so hands-on with design anymore, or really at all from the sounds of things. And I think this is a question that probably applies to a lot of different disciplines with design, writing, etc. It's not so much how do you know when is the right time to make a change like that if you're going to. I think it's as you moved along through your career, at what point did you start to consider other paths, other offshoots? So you mentioned that actual graphic design for you is just exhausting. It's a all in, like you said, you pull yourself away after however many hours sitting there and it's kind of draining. So I'm just curious what that experience was like for you in starting to realize that maybe you wanted a slightly different shape to your career. And let's simplify it. Was there a point where you were like, I don't think I can design forever. Like, I don't think I can actually be hands-on in Photoshop at the screen like this forever or for much longer?
Sure. In the beginning, you just want to create stuff. You want to make something look really, really cool. So you design the coolest looking thing you could possibly think of. And then somebody looks at it and they goes, what the hell is this? How is this going to sell my, widgets? And you're like, oh, okay. And so you learn a new way to do it. You learn, all right, well, now I have to maybe position things on the screen a little bit differently. And then you start going down that rabbit hole and exploring all the ways of solving new puzzles. So it starts out as like, make all this cool stuff, do a bunch of backflips. And after a while, you're like, well, who is that serving? Yeah, me, I can get some work from it, but also are my clients growing? Are they hitting their goals? And so I think along the lines of getting a lot of that negative feedback early on, because we didn't know what the hell we were doing, really put us in a place where it's like, it's not necessarily about designing cool shit. It's about being able to design for our clients so they can be successful.
Well, the phrase you used that when we were talking earlier was customer advocacy design or customer advocate design.
Yeah.
And I did like that. I'm going to steal that and use it in my own day to day. I think that gets at the heart of what you guys are doing and what people in your agencies like yours and roles like yours are doing.
Yeah. And it's a good balance because the clients, they come to us, they love our work. They want to redo their website or they want to rebrand or something like that. And then there it becomes this constant struggle to try to convince them to do something as cool as we want them to do it, which is, fun because you're like, hey, you saw our portfolio, but now you want to do this like hyper minimalist, simple kind of thing. And it's not really our jam. So you're always trying to teach them about good design, which is always fun. So you're always talking about design. And I don't necessarily have to be designing in order to guide our clients in a direction that I feel is creative and ambitious and extracts from them the things that excite them, making sure to ask them enough questions so that I know what really resonates with each member of the team. And so when they see what we put out there, it speaks to them viscerally and it's amplifying ideas in a way. I can give somebody something really cool. And if it doesn't work and it looks cool, it's gonna just flop. It's gonna just stay there. But if you're able to educate a whole team of marketers around an idea and really push them in a certain direction and give them the tools that they need to continue, then things go in a much different direction. And then more people will trust you in making the weird decisions and trying things out or trying something different. You have a bigger army of people advocating for you and with a higher taste level, perhaps because of the work you've done. I think me not designing has purely been because I love working with young designers. I love working with other designers. They inspire me, and watching them grow and teaching them that everything that we know about design. Now I have 4 designers, 6 designers creating what I think is this kind of symphony of amazing things that we can orchestrate. And it doesn't necessarily have to be me in there. And I think it's really hard for me as a business owner and as a designer to take a step back and not do the work. That's been the biggest struggle, is not actually doing the work and letting them lead a design and letting them focus on the design and letting them screw up and letting them get bad feedback and letting them have the success when it is something that is successful is really the only way that we've been able to grow to where we are today. it's a kind of I had to force myself to step out of it. There was a piece of it that was like, man, I wish I didn't have to put in these late nights and all this kind of junk, and I can just like focus on process because I love that stuff. But really, it for me, it comes down to having to force myself to step out of it in order to lead people, so that way they can grow in their careers and they can grow as professionals and they can grow as designers and be able to grow within our company. And I know that I'm helping these people live a life that they can go home and pay their mortgage and go on cool vacations or whatever, because now they have all of these skill sets that we've built with them.
Well, I think a big part of mentorship, which when I've had the ability to sit with people who are younger or earlier in their career, like I feel like a big part of mentorship is that letting go. And then when things go bad, being like, let's figure it out. It's okay. Like this happens. And it's even like, maybe this is a fourth podcast. It's very true of parenting too. We both have kids where, it's basically allowing people to make mistakes and then helping them learn from it, I think is a big part of mentorship. And that sounds like that's what you're describing. And that is very gratifying. And I think for people to have someone to look up to or to work with who takes that approach where it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. And then you partner with them and help them learn the right lessons from that, help them take something away, but also have it not kill their confidence. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, we do a lot of work behind the scenes, so that way that person has all the tools they need to succeed. And I think that the work that we put in behind the scenes, so a junior designer or a mid-level designer can kind of step right into it and start generating their best work and be able to show that to a client and knowing that they have us backing them up 100%, standing up for their designs and having their backs at all times. So that is another big piece of it as well, is letting them fail, but also letting them know that like we're here for them. And, you get on that call and somebody starts, ripping them apart. We're going to jump in and we're going to tell them to go fuck off. And our designers, that resonates with them.
Oh, yeah.
And they feel more confident in their work and they feel more confident taking risks. And we'll step in. We're like, all right, this risk is not a good idea because it's like undevelopable, or it's something that's like going to just eat every resource. I'm going to go have to boil my shoes and that's how I'm going to eat because of this. But being able to hold the space for them in that way, protecting them, standing up for them is also really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, the word is trust. They trust you. When your team trusts you, then you're going to get better work. They're going to feel like they can do their best work because they know that a mistake, a screw up, an oversight is not the end of the world. It's just yet another learning opportunity.
You can't really recover when you lose the trust of your team. It's not like I've seen it happen and there's no coming back. You're like, I can just go work somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm good.
All right, let's finish briefly by talking about the future. You and some of your other partners here have been screwing around with AI-generated design quite a bit, and it led to us talking a bit about this idea of obsolescence and sort of the looming threat of technology starting to squeeze people out of creative work, over the coming years. But you guys seem more like you're leaning into that kind of stuff to understand it. What's your take on the role of technology in creative work and the potential threats of software starting to replicate some of the work that people can do?
I love it. I think because we started off in a background of how can we use these tools to get as much done as possible because we have very limited resources. So now as that continues to grow, we can find creative ways of utilizing it to cut certain parts of our business. So our team could then spend more time focusing on conceptual ideas or focus more time on something that is way more intangible. When we started out, I think it was mentioned before, we were in music and people stopped buying CDs, became Napster. People were just stealing stuff. We were forced to be creative and we were excited about it. We have an entrepreneurial spirit. And so to me, that's just a new business right there. Boom. We just have a new service that we offer and, getting really deep into new media at the time. And so even with web, we started doing this at a time when Flash started to really stop being a thing. So responsive design really killed that. And so we kind of came in at that point where we started creating, and Flash developers had to play catch up. But I see where things are going with AI is just another really, really great tool to lop off and not have to do these things that just are busy work and spend more time working on them on the more abstract. And as long as we create a framework for that and we have the ability to consistently come back to that, it would be great to lean into that because it's going there. I can't just like ignore it. I can't just say, this is my old man ways. Is got to do it by hand. It's gonna go there. So I have to learn it and embrace it and see where we can take it.
Yeah, and I think about it too on the writing side, where there are tools out there that will draft copy and there's no human being involved. And maybe it's not great, but it's getting better. And for some cases, it's probably close to good enough, where it's copy and it's not necessarily trying to inspire or persuade or provide some insight. It's whatever it is. And, you can sit there shaking your fist, but there's an inevitability to it. But you're right. So then it invites the questions like, how do you use that tool to elevate the rest of the work that you're doing? How do you use that tool to spread out some of the burden? And like you said, does that mean that an agency like yours can actually take on more work because now your design team is fully engaged on pitching and storyboarding and concepting and all that kind of stuff that feeds into the more process work? It's also scary. It's also a little intimidating.
Yeah, I was using like Dolly and I was like, I'm going to stop using this for a while because the next time I use it is because it's going to be in control of me. So I'm going to just give this one a minute. I'll come back to it and use Midjourney. But I think it's like there's always going to be a need for creative people and the creative people that created that application itself, like that right there. But for us, it's also really empowering. We can utilize it to empower our clients to be able to create things after they're done working with us that are still within the lines of what we've created for them, whether it's imagery, it's blog, thumbnails, and any something where it's like just busy work for a designer, where we give them the tools that they need to be independent and not always have to come back to us all the time. And sometimes clients get confused when I say that. I'm like, no, I don't want to see you after this. I want to give you everything that you need where you come back to us because you're so successful that you want to do it again. And that's to me is really important. So being able to empower them to create within certain limitations is an exciting idea. Being able to have our designers be able to create, and some of those little technical aspects perhaps not having to focus as much on. We'll go through a whole design. There's all these. We'll come up with a whole spacing concept of how we're going to set it all up and whatever. So if AI is able to create the correct padding, so they don't have to sit there and worry about that, cool. There's little things like that where I think it can chip away along the way, but somebody along the lines is going to have to come up with the idea to begin with. So there are definitely a lot of ways for us to use it in our day-to-day. I'm excited to really be able to dig in. Our ability to focus on the why is what's important. So we focus on the why, and then something like that can just chug along.
And it's an evolution from, 15, 20 years ago, just having spell check built into Microsoft Word was like, people are like, well, kids even know how to spell anymore? And it's like, well, yes, but I tell you what, at 2:00 in the morning, when you're trying to finish a paper in college, it's nice when spell check says, nope, you got too many M's in this word.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there's even like with graphic design, there's a right and wrong way to do a lot of things, especially depending on what you're adhering to, whether you're working with grid systems or design systems and those kinds of things. So there's always going to be that. So if there's something there to help keep those things in place so people can focus on other stuff, great, cool. Being able to set your own standards and have AI see those standards through, cool. We have a certain way we like to work, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to keep it that way, and it limits us in some ways to not do other things. So, and I think that could be really helpful.
Well, Jay, it's been a blast talking to you. I'm glad we found enough to talk about without having to resort to Jersey tales. But it's been wonderful to see you and your brother have so much success.
Thank you.
You guys are the best. And it's probably weird to say I'm proud, but I'm just very happy.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on here and talking to you, and likewise. Yeah. Good job, dude.
Thanks. You too. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about Jay's work, visit his website at www.papertiger.com. Also look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode, and check out monotype.com/podcast to read about all of our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is a production of Monotype, Angelino Audio, and Marita Barres. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Take care, everybody.